Hello, this is Samsa again from GamingonLinux.com and welcome to Sproggiwood. So this game is a cute and colorful roguelike by Freehold Games, and yeah, I actually used cute with roguelike. That doesn't really happen too often. In any case, this is a roguelike that is inspired by Finnish mythology, which is actually the reason why I decided to pick this game up. It has been on Linux for some time now, but I just relatively recently decided to actually start playing it. Yeah, it's very simplistic when it comes to roguelikes. Many of the complex mechanics of typical roguelikes have actually been removed from Sproggiwood. For example, there is basically no inventory management, there are no cursed items, or anything really like that. You only really have one inventory slot per item type. The potions and scrolls, which you can also find, they share one inventory slot, but weapons and armor, etc., they only have one slot, and you cannot carry like additional equipment. If you find something and you want to keep it with you, then you can pick it up and then you can start using it, or you can just leave it, or in the case of potions and scrolls, I believe they can also be cashed for pure money. Yeah, the basics of a roguelike are still there. The game is naturally turn-based, it is based on a grid, so you can, you move around like in a typical roguelike game. You of course travel through various dungeons and you encounter all kinds of enemies which you can kill. The enemies in this game are actually quite interesting. They are, of course, all of them are very colorful and they are very easy to spot, and they also behave in different kinds of ways. So the enemy variety in this game is actually quite a lot of fun. The game itself is split into multiple dungeons which are connected by this overworld, not like in Atom though. And the permadeath in this game is kind of weird. It's not like typical roguelike stuff where if you die, all of your progress is reset. No, in this game it only resets a single dungeon. So that dungeon you just decided to go to, that gets reset if you die, and then you can try it again. But you don't lose like your progress that you have made so far. So all of the dungeons that you have visited, you have already visited them, and all the loot that you have gained, you still keep it. It's just that you lost a little bit of time. And because all of these dungeons are actually quite short, the permadeath doesn't really bother you too much. Actually, in my opinion, this is not even true permadeath. So the whether or not this is actually a roguelike can be questioned a little bit. But yeah, death doesn't really matter in this game. You can die a lot and it simply doesn't matter. And between these dungeon runs, you can also visit this, there's this village that sells all kinds of things. It's sort of like in Rogue Legacy where you, between the runs, you can get some stuff for your next run. You can buy equipment, scrolls, potions, and you can also get these passive upgrades which will increase your health, your mana, which is in this game called fatigue. There are all kinds of passive upgrades in the village, and you can also find a couple of additional quests in the village, it seems. The game progresses by you entering one of these dungeons, and then you usually go back, and then you go to another dungeon, and so on. You unlock more dungeons as you go. And you can also visit the dungeons you have been to before. If you want to, grind for some additional gold to purchase better items. Some of the items are actually quite costly, and if you want to get all of the best stuff, then you might need to do a couple of runs back to the dungeons you have actually played before. And the game actually encourages you to go back, because the game has 6 classes in total, 6 character classes, and you only start with 1. And over time, when you progress through these dungeons, you start unlocking more of them. And the game actually recommends that you beat the same dungeons with all of the character classes, because every time you beat a dungeon with another, character class, you get a hefty bonus for doing that. So you can actually get a lot of money by doing that. Also, all of these classes have their own unique set of equipment and abilities, and in order to unlock all of that equipment, so you actually need to find it in the dungeons. When you find equipment like that, you get to, use it during that dungeon run. But if you want to use that item in the next dungeon, what you can do is once you have found it, it enters the village shop, and you can go to the village and then you can purchase that piece of equipment there, and then you can actually pick that up when you start the next dungeon. The game actually gives you this screen where you can select your, let's say, loadout. So basically it gives you an option to pick from various kinds of armors, weapons. You can also pick up some passive amulets. You can pick up some potions if you have purchased them, and then you can start the dungeon with that equipment. So you don't have to start with completely new characters every single time. You can actually have some stuff on you. But your character classes, while they do level up during the dungeons, their experience progress is always reset every time you enter a new dungeon. So you have to level them up, but at least they will start with better items, and that's actually very important because later the dungeons actually get a little bit more difficult, so you actually need to start with better equipment in order to survive the first couple of levels. Story-wise, this game does have a story. It isn't just about, you know, finding the amulet of Yendor, once again, but you're actually this thing called a loghead, and you're apparently saving the Sproggiwood. And yeah, the story is quite humoristic. There are all kinds of interesting characters, but it's obviously not really the focus of the game, and the storytelling is actually it's just a couple of like beach bubbles every, you know, between the levels, and that's pretty much it. So if you want a good story, I don't think you will find it in Sproggiwood, but it's a cool thing to have nonetheless. Let's talk a bit about the UX, the user experience, next. So Sproggiwood was probably designed to be sort of a mobile game when they made it. And it actually does show, because by default the game actually has this sort of a compass, which is what you would probably use to control the game if you were playing it on a touchscreen. And it really doesn't work quite well on like PC. It actually takes a lot of the screen space for basically no reason, because we have these things called keyboards. So it doesn't really look all that great here. But luckily you can actually turn it off by selecting the PC option in the basically the menu. The game doesn't really have a separate options menu. It will eliminate the stupid compass, so the game actually starts looking a little bit better. And yeah, like I mentioned, the game can be played with the keyboard, and actually it works completely fine with just the keyboard. So if you use the numpad, you can basically do everything the game wants you to. And all of the like important things are hotkeyed. And I actually personally play the game with just the keyboard, because I don't really like to use the mouse when it comes to roguelikes, unless I am just learning them. And in addition to the mouse and keyboard, you can also play the game with a gamepad. But the gamepad support seemed a little bit buggy when I last tried it, so it didn't really work too well, and I decided to give up on the gamepad, and I went with the keyboard and mouse. Overall, I think Sproggiwood is quite an interesting game. It's sort of like a roguelike and sort of like a roguelite. It's definitely a lot more forgiving than any other roguelike I have played, and it looks kinda good. I mean, it's quite colorful. If you have listened to previous GOL casts, you will know that I love colors, because, you know, I live in the middle of nowhere where there are no colors for like half the year. And it looks good, and it plays quite well too. It's of course a lot more simplistic than your normal roguelike, but for some people that might actually be a good thing, because normal roguelikes are very complex, and it can take quite a while to actually learn them, and they are often very unforgiving. This is like the complete opposite of that. So this game is very forgiving, and it's very simple. I mean, basically anyone can play it. It isn't too easy though. Simple doesn't mean easy. Some of the levels are actually quite tough, and sometimes you will find yourself in situations where escaping them is very difficult, and you will probably have to restart some dungeons a couple of times. And I'm currently playing it on normal, and I'm getting plenty of difficulty, at least enough for me to have fun, though I'm not really usually seeking a huge challenge in games. So if you are looking for a simpler experience and a little bit easier experience, then I think Sproggiwood would probably be quite a good option. I mean, if you are overwhelmed by games like Atom and Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, then Sproggiwood, it's simple. It's basically no harder than most other games on Steam. If you want a traditional roguelike, then you probably want to look elsewhere. But if you want to have a simpler roguelike experience, then I think you should probably check out Sproggiwood. Okay, and that's basically it for Sproggiwood, and we will see in future videos.